Nathan stepped off the landing ramp, the cool air of Lorith 3 swirling around him. The sky above was a soft, silver-blue gradient, dotted with faint clouds that glowed faintly in the planet's two suns. Despite his years of training and experience, his breath hitched. First contact always felt like walking onto a stage without a script. Beside him, his team member and old friend Jonah was already scanning the surroundings. "Well, it's pretty," Jonah said, flipping down his visor. "You ever see skies like that back home?" "Maybe once," Nathan said. "In that place up north, the one with the perpetual mist. But never with two suns. It's beautiful." Their radio crackled. "Captain Carter, are you receiving?" The voice was crisp and clipped, clearly belonging to one of the Lorithan envoys. "Loud and clear," Nathan replied. He turned to Jonah and motioned toward the structures ahead. "You ready to make a good impression?" Jonah chuckled. "As ready as I'll ever be. Let's hope they're friendly." The two men walked forward, their boots crunching on the fine, powdery ground. In front of them loomed the first Lorithan city they'd ever encountered. Its buildings seemed to grow organically out of the earth, made of a material that shimmered like liquid stone. As they approached, a group of Lorithan figures emerged from one of the larger structures. They were tall, well over 7 feet, and their sleek, lithe bodies were covered in a faintly iridescent skin. Their heads were elongated, crowned with thin, flexible spines that moved with each subtle tilt. The one at the front wore a simple, fitted garment that looked more ceremonial than practical. She stepped forward with a confident grace, her bright, golden eyes fixed on Nathan. "I am Kira, Warden of the Eastern Clade," she announced. Her voice was rich and resonant, carrying a tone of command. "You are the human representatives?" "That's correct," Nathan replied. "I'm Captain Nathan Carter, and this is Lieutenant Jonah Bates." Kira's gaze flicked to Jonah, then back to Nathan. She tilted her head, a faint smirk playing on her lips. "These are your finest specimens?" Sorry," Jonah said, raising an eyebrow. "Your forms are delicate. It is a wonder you survive in such fragile vessels." Her tone was matter-of-fact, but the words still stung. Jonah rolled his eyes, and Nathan forced a calm smile. "Looks can be deceiving," Nathan said diplomatically. "We've come a long way. We'd like to learn more about your people and explore how we might work together." Kira's smirk deepened. "You have courage, I'll grant you that. But courage does not compensate for frailty. Follow me. I will show you what strength truly is." As the Lorithans turned and began walking toward the city, Nathan exchanged a glance with Jonah. "She's, direct." "You're telling me," Jonah muttered. "Delicate? Fragile? I'll show her who's fragile." "Relax, Jonah. She's just testing us. Let's see where this goes." The pair followed the Lorithans into the city. The buildings rose higher around them, their surfaces shifting in the light. The streets were bustling with Lorithans going about their daily lives. Many stopped to stare at the humans, their expressions unreadable. Nathan noticed a group of children playing with what looked like floating crystals. When one crystal slipped from a child's grasp and floated toward Nathan, he instinctively reached out to grab it. It was surprisingly light, almost weightless, and it glowed faintly in his hand. The child gasped and several adults turned to watch. Kira glanced back, her eyes narrowing. "Careful with that. You humans may not understand its nature." Nathan returned the crystal to the child, who quickly ran back to the others. "Just curious," he said. "No harm done." Kira's lips pressed into a thin line. "Curiosity can lead to harm. Your kind would do well to remember that." Jonah leaned closer to Nathan and whispered, "She's got a real sunny personality, doesn't she?" Nathan held back a smile. "Let's keep our focus. We didn't come all this way to pick a fight." Kira led them to a large, open plaza where several tall Lorithans stood in a circle, their hands extended toward a central structure. Nathan realized they were manipulating the shimmering material of the building, reshaping it in real time. The process was seamless, almost hypnotic. "You see," Kira said, gesturing to the scene. "Strength, coordination, and purpose. This is how we thrive. Every member of our society contributes. None are weak links. Nathan stepped closer, observing the intricate movements of the Lorithans. It's impressive, he admitted. I've never seen anything like it. Jonah nodded. Yeah, it's something else. But just because we don't do things the same way doesn't mean we're weak. We have our own strengths. Kira arched a brow. And what strengths might those be, Lieutenant? Well, Jonah said, crossing his arms. For starters, we're adaptable. We make things work even when the odds are against us. And we're not afraid to stand our ground. Nathan jumped in, keeping his tone steady. We also value collaboration. We learn from others and we're open to change. That's why we're here. To understand and to build connections. Kira's eyes lingered on him for a moment longer than expected. Then she turned and motioned for them to follow. Perhaps you'll have the chance to prove that. As the day wore on, the humans learned more about the Lorithan society. Its intricate hierarchy, its emphasis on physical and mental discipline, and its deep connection to the land. Nathan continued to engage with Kira, answering her pointed questions and calmly deflecting her jabs. Jonah, meanwhile, struck up conversations with other Lorithans, trying to show them that humans were more than they seemed. By the time they returned to their temporary quarters, Nathan was exhausted. Jonah flopped onto a bench and sighed. Man, she really doesn't let up, does she? No, Nathan said, sitting down across from him. But I think we're starting to make a dent. She's curious, even if she won't admit it. Jonah snorted. If you say so, I just hope tomorrow she lays off the delicate routine. I'm about ready to challenge her to an arm wrestling match. Nathan laughed. I'd pay to see that. Yeah, well, don't count on it. I like my arms in one piece. They both chuckled, the tension of the day finally easing. Despite the challenges, Nathan couldn't help feeling that they were on the verge of something important. If they could just hold their own a little longer, maybe, just maybe, they could earn the respect of these enigmatic beings. Nathan and Jonah stood at the center of the Lorithan chamber, a vast, dome-like structure that pulsed faintly with golden light. The walls shifted slightly, shimmering like liquid metal under a current. Kira stood a few feet away, her arms crossed and her gaze sharp as a blade. Behind her, two other Lorithans loomed, tall and silent, their presence a reminder that Nathan and Jonah were far from their element. Explain to me again why you think your species deserves to be here, Kira said, her tone dripping with skepticism. She leaned forward, her golden eyes boring into Nathan. We've thrived for millennia. Why should we open ourselves to outsiders who, by your own admission, are fragile and short-lived? Nathan exchanged a glance with Jonah, who nodded. Because, Nathan began, our strength doesn't come from any one individual's physical prowess. It's about how we work together, how we solve problems as a group. Kira's mouth curved into a faint smirk. So, you're saying you rely on numbers to compensate for your weaknesses? Jonah stepped forward, his tone steady but firm. It's not about numbers. It's about what we can accomplish when we combine our ideas. We're adaptable, resourceful. If something isn't working, we find another way. Kira's expression remained unreadable. Words are easy. I've yet to see proof of these abilities you claim to have. Nathan kept his voice calm. That's why we're here, to show you. Give us a chance to learn from each other. There's no harm in exploring how we might benefit from our differences. One of the other Lorithans spoke, their voice deeper and more measured. You suggest that our society could gain something from yours? I'm suggesting that both of us could gain, Nathan said. Your civilization is remarkable, your technology, your understanding of the environment. But we bring a different perspective, different skills. Kira tapped her chin, her eyes narrowing. Different skills. Like what? Nathan motioned to Jonah, who stepped forward. Take this, for example, Jonah said, producing a small device from his pack. It was a compact, handheld scanner, something simple by human standards, but apparently novel to the Lorithans. This is a multispectrum analyzer. It lets us identify and categorize materials instantly. It might not be as sophisticated as your tech, but it's portable, it's efficient, and it's incredibly useful. Kira glanced at the device, then at Jonah. And you believe this gadget demonstrates your worth? Jonah grinned. It's not just about the gadget. It's about how we think. We create tools that help us overcome our limitations. You said it yourself, we're fragile. But that's exactly why we innovate. We're always looking for ways to push beyond what we were born with. Kira's gaze lingered on him, her smirk fading. For the first time, she seemed to consider his words seriously. Perhaps there is more to you than meets the eye. Still, words and trinkets do not earn trust. Actions do. Nathan nodded. That's fair. Let us prove ourselves. Kira's expression shifted. Something subtle but significant. She turned to the other Lorithans, speaking briefly in their native tongue. The others inclined their heads, then left the chamber. Kira faced Nathan and Jonah once more. We will put you to a small test. Collaborative effort. If you succeed, perhaps we will reconsider our stance. Nathan looked at Jonah, who gave a small shrug. Sounds fair, Nathan said. What kind of test? Kira gestured toward a nearby wall, which parted seamlessly to reveal a smaller chamber. Inside was a series of mechanical constructs, elaborate, alien machines with glowing interfaces and shifting components. This is a diagnostic array we use to maintain the city's structural integrity. It has recently begun malfunctioning. Your task is to repair it. Jonah stepped closer, studying the machines. Looks complicated. You sure we're allowed to mess with it? If you damage it further, it will confirm your inadequacy, Kira said coolly. If you repair it, you will have my attention. Nathan turned to Jonah. We've worked on alien tech before. Remember that salvage operation on Epsilon 7? Jonah nodded. Yeah, and we made it work. This can't be that different. Kira crossed her arms. We shall see. Nathan and Jonah approached the machines, conferring quietly. They examined the glowing interfaces, the shifting panels, and the intricate conduits that wove through the array. While Jonah began running a scan with their analyzer, Nathan started tracing the power routes. Looks like a feedback loop here, Nathan said, pointing. If we can isolate that, it might stabilize the array. On it, Jonah replied, his fingers moving deftly over his scanner. Okay, I see where it's failing. Give me a second. Let me patch this line. As Jonah worked, Nathan kept an eye on the energy readouts. The system's glow grew steadier, the shifting components slowing their erratic movements. Finally, the array gave a soft chime and settled into a stable rhythm. Kira stepped forward, her expression unreadable. Impressive. You are more resourceful than I anticipated. Thanks, Jonah said, standing upright and brushing off his hands. Not bad for a couple of fragile guys, huh? Kira's lips twitched in what might have been the start of a smile. Perhaps there is some merit to your ingenuity. But do not think you have won my trust just yet. Nathan gave a small, polite bow. We wouldn't expect to, but we hope this is a good first step. Kira nodded. It is a step. As they walked back to their quarters, Jonah glanced at Nathan. Not bad, Captain. Not bad at all. Nathan smiled. Let's keep it up. I think we're starting to make some progress. Jonah grinned. Progress is good. Just don't let it go to your head, Carter. Noted, Nathan said, chuckling. Noted. Nathan squinted against the harsh sunlight filtering through Lorith 3's twin suns. The heat on this part of the planet was oppressive, even compared to the mild climate they'd experienced the day before. He adjusted his visor and glanced over at Jonah, who was muttering under his breath while fiddling with the straps on his gear. I thought we were past the whole proving ourselves thing, Jonah said, tugging at a loose buckle. Didn't fixing that array yesterday earn us some points? Apparently not enough, Nathan replied, shifting the weight of his pack. Kira says this is how their people gauge character. We're not just showing our skills now. We're showing we can handle ourselves when the environment pushes back. Yeah, well, I'd love to see her walk around in this heat without breaking a sweat. Nathan smiled faintly. She probably would. She's a warrior. This is probably just another day for her. Jonah sighed. Yeah, I'll stop complaining. Ahead of them, Kira walked with the ease of someone who'd spent her life on this planet. Her long, graceful strides carried her over the rocky terrain without hesitation. When she turned her head slightly, Nathan could see her golden eyes gleaming under the sun's glare. "Not keeping up," she called back, her voice laced with that familiar mix of humor and challenge. "We're right behind you," Nathan answered. "Just taking in the view." She smirked. "Careful, Captain. This place is beautiful, but it does not suffer weakness." Jonah muttered, "Guess that means we're screwed." Nathan gave him a warning glance, but he couldn't suppress a chuckle. Jonah grumbled something about superior aliens before finally falling silent. The group descended into a deep, narrow canyon. The walls were streaked with vibrant minerals that caught the sunlight, creating an almost hypnotic pattern of shifting colors. Nathan found it hard not to admire the natural beauty, even as he felt his boots sink into the fine sand. "This is where we will perform the final task," Kira said, stopping at a rocky outcrop. She gestured toward a distant structure, a low, dome-like building that shimmered with the same organic quality as the rest of Lorien architecture. "Inside is a core we use to power the aqueducts in this region. A recent quake has left it unstable. Your objective is to stabilize the core." Nathan stepped closer to get a better look at the structure. "Sounds straightforward enough. Any hazards we should know about?" Kira's expression grew more serious. "The core chamber is extremely hot, and the stabilizers must be repaired without causing further strain on the supporting struts. If the structure collapses, the energy within the core could be released uncontrolled." Jonah frowned. "So, no pressure, then?" Kira's gaze swept over him. "If you find it too daunting, you may choose not to proceed." "No, we're in," Nathan said quickly, giving Jonah a subtle nudge. "We'll handle it." Kira nodded. "Very well. I will monitor from here." As they approached the entrance to the structure, Jonah shot Nathan a sideways look. "This is getting a little intense, don't you think?" "It's part of the process," Nathan said, stepping into the shaded interior. "We're here to show we can be partners, not just visitors." Jonah sighed. "Partners who get cooked alive, apparently." Inside, the temperature rose dramatically. The chamber was small, with walls that seemed to ripple with heat distortion. At the center stood the core, an intricate assembly of crystalline rods and pulsing light. Several stabilizers were visible around the base, their once smooth surfaces warped from the quake. Nathan knelt beside one of the stabilizers, pulling a tool from his pack. "This one's taken the most damage. We'll need to reinforce it first before we can align the others." Jonah nodded, already moving to another stabilizer. "Got it. I'll start on this side." They worked in tense silence, the only sounds coming from their tools and the faint hum of the core. Sweat dripped down Nathan's face, and he could feel the heat radiating through his gloves. He glanced over at Jonah, who was muttering to himself as he adjusted a panel. "Everything okay?" Nathan asked. "Yeah, just a little finicky. Whoever designed these didn't think about human hands." Nathan smiled. "They probably never expected humans would be doing this." Jonah snorted. "Yeah, well, here we are." As Nathan tightened the final bolt on the first stabilizer, the chamber trembled slightly. He held his breath, but the core's light remained steady. "That's one down," he said. "How's it going over there?" Jonah gave him a thumbs up. "Almost done. You really think this'll impress Kira?" "Maybe. Or maybe she just wants to see if we can survive under pressure." "Well, she picked the right challenge. This is definitely pressure." A sudden tremor rolled through the chamber, and one of the stabilizers emitted a high-pitched whine. Nathan jumped to his feet. "Jonah, hold that steady. I'll check the core alignment." "Got it," Jonah said, bracing the panel with his shoulder. Nathan hurried to the core and scanned the readouts. The crystalline rods were shifting, their light flickering unevenly. He adjusted the alignment manually, his fingers working quickly despite the heat. The hum of the core grew steadier, and the chamber stopped shaking. "We're good," Nathan said, stepping back. "That should hold." Jonah exhaled loudly, wiping his forehead. Never doubted us for a second. Sure you didn't, Nathan said with a grin. Let's get out of here before it decides to act up again. They made their way back to the surface, where Kira was waiting. Her golden eyes flicked over them, noting their sweat-soaked uniforms and the smudges on their faces. For a moment, she said nothing. Well, Jonah prompted. Was that good enough for you? Kira's smirk returned. Acceptable. For humans. Nathan couldn't help but chuckle. We'll take that as a compliment. As they walked back toward the main settlement, Nathan noticed that Kira's tone had softened. Her jabs still carried humor, but there was less scorn behind them. Perhaps she was starting to see them differently after all. Nathan adjusted the thin polymer suit over his arms as he knelt beside Jonah. Their tools scattered across the metallic flooring of the Lorrythan workshop. The chamber hummed faintly, powered by machinery the humans could barely begin to understand. Around them, clusters of Lorrythans moved gracefully, speaking in their flowing language as they tinkered with complex devices. Nathan exchanged a glance with Jonah, who was carefully calibrating a handheld scanner. So, Jonah muttered, they keep throwing us into these situations. Think they're starting to like us. Nathan smirked. Maybe. Or maybe they're just curious how far we'll go. Jonah chuckled under his breath. Yeah, well, I'd rather they just tell us if they like us or not instead of making us fix another one of their unstable cores. Cage. At you do not delegate these tasks to subordinates, Kira said, folding her arms. Isn't that how your species operates? Jonah looked up. Depends. Sometimes it's better to handle things yourself. Kira raised a brow. Why? Because, Nathan said, taking the question seriously, it's how you get first-hand knowledge. When you do the work yourself, you understand the details, what works, what doesn't. You learn from the process. Kira's gaze lingered on him, her golden eyes narrowing slightly. Interesting. Among my people, a leader's time is not spent on mundane tasks. It is spent strategizing, overseeing, and commanding. That's not so different from us, Nathan admitted. But even our best commanders need to know how things work on the ground. It helps them make better decisions. I see. She tilted her head. Perhaps that's why you're still alive. Jonah snorted. Thanks for the compliment. Kira's mouth curved into a faint smirk. I merely state what I observe. One of the younger Lorrythans approached, carrying a device that looked like a miniature solar array folded into a handheld form. He spoke quickly in their language, gesturing toward a damaged panel on the wall. Kira nodded and turned back to Nathan. It appears we have another malfunction, she said. Are you able to address it? Nathan looked over at Jonah, who shrugged. Why not? Another day, another crisis. Jonah grabbed a toolkit and followed Nathan to the panel. The damaged section of wall pulsed erratically, the flow of energy through its conduits uneven and noisy. Nathan squatted down, running his hand over the surface. Looks like a misaligned coupling, Nathan said. Probably from that last quake. Coupling, huh? Jonah said, pulling out a diagnostic tool. You think it's just a quick realignment? Or is this one of those jobs that ends with us sweating bullets? Let's hope for the former, Nathan replied. As they worked, Kira stood nearby, observing in silence. Nathan couldn't tell if she was studying their methods or just keeping an eye on them to make sure they didn't mess up. Occasionally, her gaze drifted from the panel to Nathan's hands, as if curious about the way he maneuvered the unfamiliar tools. She didn't offer any commentary, but her presence was hard to ignore. Almost got it, Jonah said, twisting a spanner carefully. Just need to, there we go. A faint hum replaced the loud buzz as the conduit stabilized. Nice work, Nathan said. He turned to Kira. Should be good to go now. Kira stepped forward, running a hand over the repaired panel. Functional. Acceptable. Jonah muttered under his breath. There's that word again. Nathan ignored him, focusing on Kira. Glad we could help. Is this kind of issue common after quakes? It happens, Kira said simply. Our structures are designed to withstand much, but even the best designs can face challenges. Good to know. Hopefully, This one holds up for a while. Hopefully, she replied, her tone less sharp than before. She glanced between Nathan and Jonah, as though weighing her next words carefully. You work well together. There is a balance. Jonah straightened up. Yeah, well, we've been a team for years. Comes with the territory. Indeed, Kira said. She looked at Nathan. You value this partnership. Nathan nodded. I do. We rely on each other. A flicker of something, curiosity, perhaps, crossed Kira's face. A curious approach. Jonah grinned. Teamwork, Kira. You should try it sometime. To Nathan's surprise, Kira didn't bristle at Jonah's comment. Instead, she gave a small nod. Perhaps there is more merit in your methods than I previously thought. Nathan smiled faintly. That's all we're asking for. Kira's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. Then let us see how far this partnership can take you. The winds of Lorith III were harsher than Nathan remembered. His visor fogged as he trudged along the rocky path, his gear rattling softly with every step. Beside him, Jonah adjusted his shoulder straps and glanced up at the sky, where the twin suns burned pale white against the darkening horizon. Kira led the way ahead, her long, steady strides making the journey look effortless. Jonah sighed, his voice carrying through the calms. Why does every mission on this planet feel like it's uphill, through mud, with a storm blowing in our faces? Could be worse, Nathan replied. At least the gear's holding up. For now. But if it breaks, you're carrying me back. Kira turned her head slightly, the light catching the sharp angles of her face. Is it always like this with humans? So much talk, so little focus. Jonah gave an exaggerated shrug. We like to keep things interesting. Interesting. Her tone carried a trace of amusement, though she quickly masked it. I see. Nathan sped up slightly, walking in step with Kira. You never talk about how your people relax. Or do you just not? Kira glanced at him. Relaxation is not our priority. We find fulfillment in challenge and achievement. What would you have us do? Sit idly and chit-chat? It wouldn't hurt, Nathan said with a small smile. Sometimes you learn more when you're not trying so hard. She tilted her head, considering his words. Your approach is strange, yet it seems to serve you well. I cannot deny your kind is resourceful. High praise coming from you, Jonah muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. Kira shot him a sharp glance but said nothing. Instead, she stopped at a ridge overlooking a vast valley, its surface shimmering with patches of crystalline formations that refracted the fading sunlight. The sight was breathtaking, even after days of exploring Lorith III's alien landscapes. This is our destination, Kira announced, pointing to a small structure near the center of the valley, a weather station critical to monitoring the atmospheric shifts in this region. It has fallen into disrepair. Jonah squinted into the distance. Looks simple enough. What's the catch? The structure's stabilizers were damaged in the recent tremors, Kira explained. We must repair them before the next storm season arrives. Nathan nodded. Sounds straightforward. What's the timeline? We should finish before the sun's set completely, she replied. Otherwise, the temperature drop will complicate the repairs. Jonah groaned softly. So, no pressure. Nathan glanced at him. Better get moving. They descended into the valley, the path becoming more rugged as the air grew cooler. Once at the station, Nathan and Jonah quickly unpacked their tools and began assessing the damaged components. Kira stood nearby, observing their movements with her usual sharp attention. All right, Nathan said, crouching down by one of the stabilizers. This one's bent out of shape. If we recalibrate it, we should be able to lock it back into place. Good. You take that side, I'll check the next one, Jonah said, moving to the opposite end. As they worked, Kira spoke suddenly. You two seem to anticipate each other's movements. How long have you been working together? Nathan didn't look up from his work. 7 years. Maybe a bit longer. 7 years, she repeated, almost to herself. And you have not grown tired of each other's company? Jonah laughed. Not yet. We drive each other nuts sometimes, but it works. Kira's gaze shifted from Jonah to Nathan. That is uncommon. Among my people, partnerships are often short-lived, focused. Once the task is complete, the partnership dissolves. Sounds efficient, Nathan said, tightening a bolt. But I guess we look at it differently. To us, the relationship, the teamwork, is just as important as the goal. That may explain why you humans are so… Kira hesitated. Adaptive. Jonah glanced over his shoulder. See? She's warming up to us. Nathan smirked but said nothing. He focused on securing the stabilizer, listening as the hum of the station grew steadier. The structure's light shifted to a more stable glow, indicating progress. This one's done, Nathan called out. How's it looking on your end, Jonah? Almost there, Jonah replied. Just gotta lock this last piece in place. Kira stepped forward, examining the repaired section. Efficient work, she admitted. Nathan stood, wiping his hands on his suit. Thanks. It helps having a good partner. Kira tilted her head. A curious bond. One built not on blood or necessity, but on choice. It's what makes it strong, Nathan said. We choose to trust each other, no matter what. For a moment, Kira said nothing. Then she gave a slight nod. Perhaps there is wisdom in that. The three of them finished the repairs as the suns dipped closer to the horizon. By the time they started back toward the ridge, the temperature had dropped noticeably. Jonah walked alongside Kira, chatting casually about the various tools humans used. Kira responded more openly now, asking questions about their engineering methods and how they solved problems on less hospitable worlds. Nathan lingered behind for a moment, watching them. Kira's earlier sharpness seemed to have softened. She still carried herself with the pride of a warrior, but there was a new openness in her posture and tone. As they reached the top of the ridge, Kira turned to Nathan. You have done well today. Your approach is different from ours, but it is not without merit. Nathan smiled. High praise, coming from you. She allowed a faint smile to touch her lips. Do not let it go to your head, Captain. Jonah laughed. Too late for that. Kira shot him a sharp look, but there was no real malice in it. The three of them stood for a moment, watching as the valley below faded into the twilight. The challenge was completed, but something deeper had been built. Something that felt more meaningful than a repaired structure. The Lorethan chamber was quiet, save for the faint hum of the glowing walls and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the three figures gathered within. Nathan stood next to Jonah, their tools laid out on a metallic table. Across from them, Kira observed in silence, her golden eyes fixed on Nathan with an intensity that made Jonah mutter under his breath. She's staring again, Jonah whispered, keeping his voice low. She's not staring, Nathan replied without turning his head. She's evaluating. Jonah smirked. Right, evaluating. That's why her eyes haven't left you for the past 5 minutes. Nathan chose not to respond. Instead, he reached for one of the crystalline components they'd been examining. The device was small but intricate, its inner structure shifting faintly with each movement. The Lorethans had asked for their assistance in fine-tuning it. A seemingly minor task, but one that required precision. As Nathan worked, Kira stepped closer, her presence commanding. She leaned in slightly, watching his hands as he made a careful adjustment. Your movements are meticulous. Nathan glanced up. You sound surprised. Kira raised a brow. Many who claim precision lack it in practice. You, however, are deliberate. Jonah snorted. What she means is, you're not as clumsy as she thought. Kira's gaze flicked to Jonah, her tone sharp. I meant what I said. Nathan smiled faintly. Well, I'll take that as a compliment. Kira's eyes lingered on him for a moment longer before she stepped back. Proceed. Nathan returned his focus to the component. This should be the last adjustment. Jonah, double-check the readings. On it, Jonah replied, picking up a scanner. After a few moments, he nodded. Looks stable. Good work, Captain. Thanks. Nathan placed the component on the table and straightened. Kira, Is there anything else you need from us today? Kira hesitated, her gaze shifting between Nathan and the device on the table. No, that will suffice. You have proven capable. Glad to hear it, Jonah said, stretching his arms. So we're done here? Kira nodded. For now. You may leave. Jonah glanced at Nathan. You coming? In a minute, Nathan replied. I want to run one more check on the calibrations. Suit yourself. Jonah gathered his tools and left the chamber, leaving Nathan and Kira alone. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Kira stood motionless, watching as Nathan carefully reviewed the readouts on the device. When he finally set it down, he turned to find her still studying him. Is something wrong? Nathan asked. No, Kira said simply. I was merely observing. Nathan smiled. You're curious about humans, aren't you? She tilted her head. I am curious about you. That caught him off guard. He hesitated, then said, What about me? Kira took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. You are not what I expected. Your form is fragile, yet you endure. Your actions show purpose, yet you speak of choice and trust as though they are as vital as air. It is unusual. Nathan felt a faint warmth rise to his face, but he met her eyes steadily. I think you're starting to understand that our strength isn't just physical. It's how we connect, how we support each other. Connection, Kira repeated, her voice softer now. It is not a concept I have given much thought. Well, maybe it's something worth considering, Nathan said. For a long moment, they simply stood there, the faint hum of the chamber filling the air. Then, to Nathan's surprise, Kira reached out. Her hand brushed against his arm, lightly, tentatively. Her touch was cool yet gentle. Nathan didn't pull away. Instead, he looked down at her hand, then back at her face. Kira, he said, his voice low, what are you doing? I am considering, she replied, her tone almost uncertain. Your kind speaks of connection, trust. Perhaps it is something I should learn to understand. Nathan smiled faintly. I think you're already starting to. Her hand lingered for a moment longer before she withdrew it, her expression returning to its usual composed state. You are not unworthy, she said at last. High praise, Nathan replied, his tone light. Kira allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to touch her lips. Do not let it go to your head. I wouldn't dream of it, Nathan said with a chuckle. They left the chamber together, their steps falling into an unspoken rhythm. Though no words were exchanged, something had shifted, subtle, yet undeniable. The walls between them weren't entirely gone, but they had begun to crack, allowing something new to take root. It wasn't trust yet, but it was a start. The Lorithan council chamber was quiet as Nathan and Jonah stood in the center of the room, flanked by their Lorithan escort. The air was heavy with anticipation. Around them, tall, elegant figures watched in silence, their glowing eyes fixed on the two humans. Kira stepped forward, her presence as commanding as ever. The council has observed your actions. They have seen your work, your decisions, your persistence. Jonah leaned slightly toward Nathan, his voice a low whisper. That's her way of saying we're not completely useless. Nathan gave him a small nudge, silencing him. We're honored to have had the chance to contribute. We've learned a lot from working with your people. And we from you, Kira replied, her tone neutral, though her gaze lingered on Nathan. But the council wishes to know more before determining if this collaboration will continue. Jonah raised an eyebrow. More? Haven't we already proven we're not here to mess things up? Kira shot him a sharp glance. The council does not simply consider competence. They must be certain of your intentions, your values, and your ability to adapt. Nathan stepped in before Jonah could say anything else. We're more than willing to answer any questions you have. Kira turned her attention back to Nathan. Very well. Follow me. As they left the chamber, Jonah shook his head. This just keeps getting better. You think they're ever gonna trust us? Nathan glanced at him. Trust takes time. And they've spent who knows how many generations doing things their way. We can't expect them to change overnight. Jonah grumbled under his breath, but he didn't argue. The two followed Kira down a series of sleek, metallic corridors until they reached a smaller, more private meeting room. The walls glowed faintly, casting soft, golden light over the circular table in the center. Kira gestured for them to sit, then took a seat opposite them. "The council is divided," she began, her voice calm but firm. "Some believe you have shown potential. Others remain skeptical. They question whether humans can be trusted to work alongside us without creating conflict." Nathan leaned forward, his tone steady. "We understand their concerns. We don't want conflict. We're here to learn, to share knowledge. That's it." Kira's golden eyes locked onto his. "And yet, humans have a reputation. Your history is filled with war, conquest, and destruction. How do you explain that?" Jonah let out a long breath, leaning back in his chair. "Yeah, okay, humans have had their fair share of problems. But that's the whole point, isn't it? We learn from our mistakes. We grow. We're not the same as we were 100, even 50 years ago." Nathan nodded. "Jonah's right. We don't deny our past, but we don't let it define us either. We've come here to build something new, not repeat old patterns." Kira tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "And how can we be sure you are different? Actions speak louder than words," Nathan said. "Let us keep working with you. Let us show you through what we do." The room fell silent for a moment. Then Kira leaned back slightly, her eyes never leaving Nathan's. "You speak with conviction, Captain Carter. It is difficult to dismiss." Jonah raised a hand. "I'll take that as a compliment." Kira ignored him, her gaze softening just slightly. "Very well. I will relay your words to the council. In the meantime, you may continue your work." Nathan inclined his head. "Thank you." As they exited the meeting room, Jonah let out a long sigh. "Man, I feel like we've been on trial since we got here." "We're earning their trust," Nathan said. "Bit by bit." Jonah rolled his eyes. "Yeah. Well, it'd be nice if they just gave us a handshake and said, 'Good job.'" Nathan smiled faintly. "Where's the fun in that?" They walked back toward their quarters, the tension easing slightly. Jonah spoke more freely now, cracking jokes about Lorien customs and poking fun at Nathan's diplomatic tone. Nathan didn't mind. If anything, Jonah's humor helped lighten the mood. When they reached their quarters, Kira was waiting. She stood by the entrance, her posture relaxed but her expression unreadable. Jonah raised an eyebrow. "You missed us already?" Kira's gaze flicked to Jonah briefly before settling on Nathan. "I wish to speak with your captain." Jonah stepped back, raising his hands. "Hey, no complaints here. I'll let you two talk." He left them alone and Nathan turned to Kira. "What's on your mind?" For a moment, Kira didn't answer. Then she said quietly, "Your words in the council chamber. Do you truly believe them?" "Yes," Nathan said without hesitation. "I wouldn't have said them otherwise." She stepped closer, her golden eyes searching his face. "It is unusual to find someone who speaks so plainly. Among my people, words are often tools of strategy. To hear someone say Exa as gone," Nathan leaned back against the wall, exhaling slowly. Jonah peeked his head out from the other room. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," Nathan said. "Everything's fine." Jonah gave him a knowing look. "You sure about that?" Nathan shook his head, smiling faintly. "Get some rest, Jonah." As Nathan lay down, his thoughts lingered on Kira's words. Trust wasn't easy to earn, but maybe, just maybe, they were starting to get somewhere. Nathan and Jonah sat on a wide ledge overlooking the sprawling Lorien city, its shimmering towers bathed in the twin suns' light. The cool evening breeze brought a welcome reprieve from the heat they had endured earlier in the day. A quiet, companionable silence settled between them as they took in the view. "Hard to believe we've been here this long," Jonah said, breaking the silence. He leaned back on his elbows, gazing at the sky where a faintly glowing moon was beginning to rise. "Feels like we just landed yesterday." "Yeah," Nathan agreed. But we've come a long way since then. Jonah smirked. You mean you've come a long way? Nathan glanced at him. What's that supposed to mean? Come on, man. Jonah motioned to the city below. You and Kira. She actually listens to you now. Hell, she almost smiled at one of my jokes the other day. If that's not progress, I don't know what is. Nathan shook his head. It's not about me. It's about building something lasting between our people. If we can make that happen, if we can show that we're more than just visitors, then it's worth it. You ever wonder why they sent us, though? Jonah asked, his voice quieter now. Out of everyone, why us? Nathan thought for a moment, then said, maybe because we're not the type to give up easily. And maybe because we've got just the right mix of stubbornness and curiosity. Jonah chuckled. Stubbornness, huh? I'll take that. As they sat there, Kira appeared at the edge of the ledge, her movements graceful yet unhurried. She stood behind them, watching the horizon for a moment before speaking. The council has reached a decision. Nathan and Jonah turned to face her. And? Nathan asked, his tone calm but curious. Kira stepped closer, her expression as composed as ever. They have agreed to extend our cooperation. Your actions have shown that you are not here to exploit or destroy. You have demonstrated a willingness to learn, adapt, and contribute. Jonah raised an eyebrow. So they're letting us stick around? For now, Kira said, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. They will allow you to remain and continue your work, under certain conditions. What kind of conditions? Nathan asked. You will share your knowledge freely, without expecting immediate returns. You will respect our traditions and practices, even if they differ from your own. And you will continue to prove your intentions through actions, not just words. Nathan nodded. Sounds fair. Good, Kira said. Because if you fail to meet these conditions, the council will reconsider their decision. We won't fail, Nathan said, his voice steady. We'll do whatever it takes to make this work. Jonah grinned. Speak for yourself, Captain. I was thinking of taking a vacation. Kira's gaze flicked to Jonah, and this time, her smile was unmistakable. Perhaps a break would not be unwelcome, but I doubt you would find it as satisfying as your current work. Jonah tilted his head. Was that a compliment? An observation, Kira said, though her tone held a hint of humor. Nathan rose to his feet, stepping closer to her. Thank you, Kira, for speaking on our behalf. She met his eyes, her expression softening just slightly. You earned it. I merely conveyed the truth. They stood there for a moment, the three of them, as the last rays of sunlight faded and the stars began to emerge. The city below glimmered with a faint, otherworldly light, and the air seemed charged with a quiet sense of possibility. Nathan glanced at Jonah, who was busy fiddling with his gear. You ready for whatever comes next? Jonah shrugged. Long as I've got coffee and a good wrench, I'll be fine. Nathan turned back to Kira. And you? Are you ready to keep putting up with us? Kira's golden eyes glinted in the starlight. I believe I can endure it. Nathan smiled. That's all I needed to hear. They descended from the ledge together, walking side by side. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like they were truly moving forward, together.